The first thing Elias learned on Whitlow Plantation was that fear had layers. There was the ordinary fear, sharp, simple, the kind that lived in the stomach and clenched the throat when an overseer's boots crunched gravel behind you. That fear was loud, it shouted warnings, it made your hands obey faster than your mind. Then there was the fear that didn't move. It sat in people's eyes like a shadow that refused to leave, even in daylight. It lived in the way voices dropped without anyone asking. It hid in the pauses, those strange empty spaces between words, like the air itself was listening. Wait a second before we continue towards the video. Let us know in the comments which country you're watching from and what time of day it is for you. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a chilling story. Elias met that fear before he even reached the quarters. He arrived with 4 others in the back of a wagon that smelled of wet rope and old wood. The road into the plantation was narrow and flanked by trees that grew so close together their branches formed a tunnel. Leaves blocked the sky in places, turning the noon sun into dim green light. The driver never spoke. The man beside him never lifted his head. When the wagon finally rolled out of the tree tunnel, the plantation opened like a wound. Fields spread wide, rows of cotton stretching so far they blurred into pale, trembling lines. Beyond them, the main house sat on a rise like it had grown there, white and clean from a distance. The outbuildings lay scattered, barns, sheds, smokehouse, each one positioned with a cold kind of logic, and to the side, tucked as if someone didn't want them seen, were the quarters, low cabins, dark and cramped, the wood old enough to have soaked up decades of voices. Elias's wrists were sore where the rope had rubbed. His tongue felt thick and dry. He stepped down from the wagon and almost stumbled, his legs not used to standing still for so long. The others stood near him, heads lowered, as if lowering their gaze could make them smaller. A man approached them. Not one of the masters. Elias could tell by the wear in his clothes, the dirt under his nails. But he carried himself like someone who had earned permission to speak. He was older, perhaps 50, with hair gone thin and gray at the temples. His eyes were sharp and tired at the same time. He looked Elias over the way a carpenter might look at warped wood. "You," he said, pointing at Elias. "Name?" Elias swallowed. "Elias." The man nodded once, like he'd heard a tool being identified. "I'm Henry. If you want to live long enough to see another season, you listen. You don't argue. You don't try your luck." Elias opened his mouth, not to argue, only to ask. Henry cut him off with a flat palm raised halfway. "Not here." Elias closed his mouth. Henry looked at the other new arrivals, asked names, nodded to each, then turned back to Elias. "You got sense in your head?" Elias began. Henry's gaze tightened. "Yes or no?" "Yes," Elias said quickly. "Good," Henry replied. "Then you'll keep it, because this place will try to take it." He waved them forward toward the cabins. Men and women moved between them carrying buckets, wood, sacks of something heavy. No one stopped to stare. No one asked who they were. It wasn't indifference. It was a careful refusal. Elias noticed something else, the way everyone worked as if a clock was inside them, ticking louder than the sun, not the ordinary day rhythm, work until the bell, rest until the bell, but a second rhythm beneath it. Like there was a different schedule only some people could hear. A young boy ran past, barefoot, chasing a chicken with a string in his hand. He laughed once, then stopped abruptly as if someone had struck him. He looked toward the far edge of the quarters where the tree line began again. Darker there, thick with vines, and his laughter died without a sound. He backed away, clutching the string like it was a lifeline. Elias followed the boy's gaze. There was nothing obvious, just trees, but the air along that edge looked heavier, like heat above a road, except it wasn't shimmering. It was still. Henry noticed Elias looking. "Don't stare at that," he said, quiet but hard. Elias blinked. "At what?" Henry's mouth tightened. "You'll learn, but you don't need to be in a hurry." They reached a cabin with a sagging roof and a door that didn't shut properly. Henry pushed it open with his shoulder. "Here," he said. "You'll sleep on the left side. Don't take someone else's space. Don't step on people in the dark." Inside, the air was stale, warm, and crowded with bodies and breath. A woman in the corner held a baby that didn't cry. 2 men sat on the floor mending something, maybe a shirt, maybe a sack. Their eyes flicked up, then away. Elias set down the small bundle of cloth he'd been allowed to keep, nothing but a ragged shirt and a pair of shoes that weren't quite his size. He tried to find a spot to sit without making himself a problem. Henry stayed at the door a moment, scanning the room, as if counting heads. Then he spoke again, softer. "Listen close. There are rules here." Elias nodded, barely moving. Henry raised one finger. "You don't fight where it can be seen, not because fighting is wrong, because if they see it, they'll punish 10 for 1. He raised a second finger. "You don't steal food from the smokehouse, not because you won't want to, because it's bait. He raised a third. You don't go near the master's horses, even if they look calm, especially if they look calm. Elias's throat tightened. He didn't know if Henry was teaching him survival or listing the ways this place enjoyed breaking people. Henry paused, then lowered his hand. His gaze moved to the far wall of the cabin and stayed there as if the wood had suddenly become interesting. "And there's one more," he said. The cabin seemed to grow quieter, as if everyone had leaned in without moving. Henry didn't look at Elias when he spoke. "There's a rule nobody says out loud." Elias waited. Henry's jaw worked once, the muscles in his cheek jumping. "It's not written. It's not posted. It's not shouted by overseers, but it's the rule that matters most." Elias felt the hair on his arms lift. "What is it?" he whispered. Henry's eyes snapped back to him, sharp as a blade. "You don't ask that." Elias flinched. He'd meant no disrespect, but he could feel the room turning colder, the attention of strangers brushing against him like fingers. Henry stepped closer, lowering his voice so it became a private thing. "You'll know it by the way people act," Henry said. "By the way mothers pull children inside before it gets too late. By the way men stop talking mid-sentence when the light shifts. By the way even the dogs keep their mouths shut." Elias tried to swallow and found his throat too dry. Henry glanced toward the doorway. Outside, sunlight still shone, but it felt like the day was already leaning toward evening. "Whatever you do," Henry said, "when you feel that pull in the air, when you feel like the world is holding its breath, you get indoors, you shut your mouth. You don't go looking. You don't go listening." Elias frowned slightly. "Listening to what?" Henry's stare warned him. Elias amended quickly. "I understand." Henry didn't seem satisfied, but he nodded once. "Good." He turned to leave, then paused at the threshold. "And if you see someone break it," Henry added, "you didn't see, you didn't hear, you didn't even think." Then he was gone, and the door hung half open, letting a strip of daylight fall across the floor like a pale finger. Elias sat very still. The cabin slowly returned to its previous rhythm. Soft murmurs, slow movement, a cough. But something had changed, not in them. In him. He had lived with rules before. Every place had rules. Some were spoken. Ate food only because it went into the mouth and kept the body from falling. They moved to the fields in lines, worked until their backs screamed, returned when the light began to dull. The overseers' voices cut the air like whips, even when whips weren't used. The master's presence was a pressure you felt rather than saw. Elias kept his head down, did what he was told, watched everything from the edge of his vision, but the unnamed rule appeared on its own, without Henry having to say more. It happened as the sun slid lower, not yet gone. Not yet dangerous, Elias thought. Just evening. A woman near him, older and heavy-limbed from years of work, suddenly stopped picking. Her hands froze mid-motion. Her eyes flicked toward the tree line. Then she whispered, not to Elias, not to anyone specific, just to the air, "Time." The word moved through the rows like wind through grass. People began to pack up faster than the overseers demanded. Heads turned toward the quarters. A tension rose that had nothing to do with the work. Elias heard one of the overseers call out, irritated, "Move! You move when I say," but even his voice seemed smaller against whatever had shifted. As they walked back, Elias noticed the dogs. 2 hounds usually ran along the path, tongues lolling, proud of their own power. Elias had seen them earlier snapping at a boy's heels just for fun. Now those same hounds trotted near the wagons with tails low. They kept glancing toward the woods. Their ears were back. One of them whined, a thin, nervous sound. Then it stopped, like the dog had swallowed its own voice. The path to the quarters felt longer than it had in the morning. Shadows stretched across the dirt. The air cooled, but not in a gentle way, in a way that made Elias think of water deepening. When they reached the cabins, people didn't linger, no sitting on steps, no soft talk, no slow movement. They poured inside like a tide retreating from something it couldn't fight. Elias went in with them, his heart beating too hard for no reason he could name. Inside, the cabin was darker. The small window gave less light than it should have, as if the world outside had dimmed faster than the sky. Someone shut the door. Not fully. It still wouldn't latch, but enough to make a statement. A child began to cry quietly in the corner. His mother rocked him, murmuring, "Hush, hush, hush," like she was soothing a storm. Elias sat on his side of the cabin, eyes adjusting, ears straining despite Henry's warning not to listen. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time felt strange in that darkness, as if it had been bent. Then Elias heard it. Not a scream, not a whip crack, not a voice calling orders. It was something else, soft, far away, almost gentle, like someone humming. The sound drifted in from the direction of the woods, sliding through the cracks in the cabin walls. It wasn't a song Elias recognized. Aiding, exactly. More like sliding away, like it had never been meant for them, only near them. When it finally stopped, no one exhaled in relief. They only remained still for a few heartbeats longer, as if waiting to see whether the world would punish them for breathing again. Then, slowly, sounds returned. A cough, a shift of feet, a soft sob from someone who had been holding it back, and finally whispers, not conversation, not gossip, just fragments. Too close. Not tonight. Thank God. Elias leaned slightly toward the man beside him, a thin-faced worker with scarred knuckles. "What was that?" Elias whispered. The man's eyes widened as if Elias had shouted, "Don't," he hissed, almost silent. "You don't say it." "I'm just, don't," the man repeated, voice shaking. "Don't think it." Elias sat back, heart pounding. He understood then that Henry hadn't been exaggerating. This wasn't superstition. It wasn't a story told to frighten children into obedience. It was real in the way fear had shaped these people, carefully, consistently, over years. Elias lay down later on his thin bedding, staring into darkness he could not measure. He tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes he heard the humming again, and the memory of everyone's silence pressed against him like a weight. He told himself the obvious things. It could have been a woman somewhere in the trees. It could have been someone walking past. It could have been anything. But the way the overseers had not shouted into the woods, the way the dogs had gone quiet, the way even the strongest men had stared at the floor like children caught in wrongdoing, those were not reactions to an ordinary sound. Elias waited until the cabin's breathing became deep and steady, until he could tell most people had drifted into uneasy sleep. Then he sat up carefully, slow as a shadow. The door's crack showed a thin slice of moonlight outside. He didn't mean to break the rule. Not really, he only meant to look. Only to confirm the woods were just woods. Only to see if the air outside felt normal again. He eased toward the door on hands and knees, keeping his body low. Every creak of wood sounded loud in his ears. He reached the doorway and paused, listening. Nothing. No humming. No footsteps. Just the far-off chirp of insects. The soft rustle of leaves. Elias leaned forward slightly and peered outside. The yard between the cabins and the tree line was silver under moonlight. Still, empty. The world looked harmless in that pale light. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, and that was when he saw it. Not a person, not a shape, a movement. Faint, nearly invisible, at the edge of the woods, like something gliding between tree trunks where shadows were thickest. Elias squinted, trying to make sense of it. The movement stopped. He felt, suddenly and unmistakably, like something had turned its attention toward him. Like a face had lifted in the darkness, like eyes, though he could not see them, had found the crack in the door and looked straight through. Elias's blood went cold. He pulled back, pressing himself against the inside wall, heart hammering so hard he feared it would wake the whole cabin. Outside, nothing moved. No sound came. But the feeling remained, a weight of awareness just beyond the doorway. Elias stayed frozen, barely breathing. Then, so softly he might have imagined it, the humming returned. Not far away, not drifting. Right there, just outside the cabin door. Elias clapped a hand over his mouth to stop a gasp from escaping. The humming was closer than close. It was intimate, as if someone stood inches from the crack of moonlight, humming with patience, with certainty, as if it knew he was there. Elias squeezed his eyes shut. In his mind, Henry's voice returned like a lash. "When you feel that pull in the air, you get indoors, you shut your mouth, you don't go looking, you don't go listening. Eli." As had looked, now he could feel the consequence waiting on the other side of the door. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He simply listened against his will as the humming shifted into something almost like a lullaby. And then it stopped. Silence rushed in so fast it hurt. A heartbeat later, something brushed the outside of the cabin, wood scraping softly like fingertips along a wall. Elias stayed pressed to the boards, eyes wide in darkness, as the sound moved along the cabin's side, slowly, searching, lingering. Then it passed. The pressure lifted. Elias remained still for a long time, until his muscles ached and his throat burned. When he finally crawled back to his bedding, he did it without making a sound, as if noise itself could bring the humming back. He lay down, staring at the ceiling he couldn't see, and realized something with a clarity that left him trembling. The rule wasn't about what they would do to you if you broke it. It was about what would come to you, and somewhere deep inside him, another thought formed, quiet but sharp as a needle. If the thing outside had come to the cabins when he looked, then it had come before, and someone once had stayed outside long enough to see what it truly was. Elias's eyes burned with fear and curiosity in equal measure as he whispered into the dark, not to anyone, not even to himself. "What did you see?" The cabin did not answer. But in the silence, Elias understood the most dangerous truth of all. The unnamed rule had been broken before, and the person who broke it had not simply been punished, they had been taken. Elias did not sleep, not in the way a body is meant to sleep. He drifted into something thin and broken, like a man trying to rest on water. Each time his eyelids fell, the humming returned, soft, steady, impossibly close, until his eyes snapped open again and he stared into the darkness like it could be forced to confess. By morning, his muscles ached from staying tense too long. The cabin woke the way it always did, not with a bell inside the room, but with the shift of bodies and the quiet urgency of survival. Someone's elbow brushed his ribs. Someone else stepped over his feet. The door opened, and cold morning air rushed in, carrying the smell of damp earth and smoke. Elias sat up slowly, careful not to look like he'd been awake all night. Henry appeared at the doorway just as the line began to form outside. Men, women, older children, moving like they were pulled by a rope the masters held. Henry's eyes found Elias almost instantly, not as a greeting, as an inspection. Elias lowered his gaze, pretending to adjust his shirt. Henry didn't speak to him, not then. But as they walked out toward the fields, Henry drifted close enough that Elias could smell the bitter leaf on his breath. "You get indoors on time," Henry murmured, not looking at him. Elias's throat tightened. He didn't know if Henry knew. He didn't know how Henry could know. Elias forced his voice steady. "Yes." Henry's jaw flexed once. "Good." And then Henry moved away, slipping back into the mass of workers like he'd never spoken. All day, Elias worked with the cotton, scratching his fingers raw. The overseers stalked the rows, voices sharp, whips hanging like promises from their belts. Elias kept his pace, kept his head down, kept his mind from wandering too far into last night. But fear has a way of pulling the mind back to the same wound again and again. Every time Elias looked toward the tree line, his stomach tightened. It wasn't even that he saw something, it was that he felt something. Like the woods were not a place but a watching. Like a person standing behind a curtain, still as stone, waiting for the curtain to move. When the sun began to tilt, the second rhythm returned. Elias noticed it first in the smallest changes, shoulders tightening, hands moving faster, eyes flicking repeatedly toward the cabins. Even the overseers seemed restless. One of them shouted more than usual, but his voice had an edge of impatience that didn't match power. The older woman in the row beside Elias whispered again, "Time," as if speaking a holy warning. Men began passing the word down the line without words at all. Just a glance, a nod, a quick tightening of the mouth. Elias worked faster, not because he feared the overseer, but because he feared what would happen if he wasn't back. By the time they reached the quarters, the sun was still up, and yet it felt late. That was the strange part. The sky could still hold light, but the plantation behaved as if night had already arrived. People poured into cabins, doors closed, children were pulled inside by wrists and elbows. No one lingered on the steps. No one shouted across yards. The dogs were quieter again, heads low, eyes darting. Elias forced himself into his cabin and sat near the wall, exactly where he had been the night before. He tried to copy the others, stillness, lowered gaze, controlled breathing, but his mind fought him. He wanted to know. He wanted to understand what kind of rule didn't need to be spoken to be obeyed. He wanted to know who had been taken, and he wanted to know whether the humming would come again. A man in the cabin, thin-faced with scarred knuckles, kept glancing at Elias, like Elias was a rock in his shoe. The man's name, Elias had learned, was Jude. Jude didn't like him. Or maybe Jude didn't like what Elias might bring. Elias kept his eyes down, resisting the urge to ask questions. Then the humming started. Not far, not close, just there. It slid through the cabin's cracks like smoke. Every spine stiffened. Even the baby went quiet again. The humming rose and fell, steady as breathing. Elias tried to listen without looking like he was listening. The sound was the same as the night before. Wordless, patient, almost tender. It made no sense. There was nothing cruel in it. And that was what made it worse. Cruelty at least has a face. It announces itself. It threatens and demands. This humming did neither. It simply existed, as if the plantation belonged to it. Minutes passed, or hours. Eventually exhaustion pulled people down. Bodies sank to bedding, eyes closed. But Elias stayed awake, listening, hating himself for listening. He waited for the humming to return. It didn't, and somehow that was worse. At some point the cabin became fully dark and quiet. Elias lay on his side, staring into blackness, his mind drawing lines between things that did not want to be connected. The unnamed rule was tied to a time. The humming came during that time, and something walked close to the cabins, choosing something, not this one, someone had whispered, that implied there was this one. A cabin that was chosen, a person, a night when the shadow did not drift away. Elias's pulse quickened. He turned his head slightly and listened harder, trying to catch any sound outside. There was nothing, not even insects, as if the plantation held its breath long after it didn't need to. Elias thought of running, of throwing himself out into the night and sprinting until his lungs tore. But he knew better. He didn't know the land. He didn't know where the swamp began. He didn't know where hunters waited. And the woods themselves, he didn't know what they held. Instead, he lay still and tried to force sleep, but his mind refused to close. It circled one question like a buzzard. Who was taken? Morning came like a punishment. Work returned. Overseers returned. The field returned. The unnamed rule faded into the background, not gone, simply waiting. Elias spent the day watching people instead of the cotton. Not openly. Not like suspicion. Like study. He watched which mothers pulled children indoors first. He watched which men grew quiet too early. He watched which cabins seemed to hold more fear than others. And he noticed something. There was an empty cabin. Not fully empty. Nothing on this plantation was allowed to be wasted, but empty in the way a mouth is empty when a tooth is missing. It stood near the edge of the quarters, closer to the tree line than the others. Its door hung crooked. Its window was boarded from the inside. No one went near it. People walked around it without looking at it. Even the children didn't run close. Elias's eyes kept drifting toward that cabin like a magnet. At midday, while carrying a bucket, water from the well, Elias passed close enough to see something carved into the wood near the door frame. Not letters. Marks. Deep lines, as if someone had scratched them with nails or a knife. He slowed his steps, pretending his bucket was heavy. The marks formed a pattern. Tall, uneven slashes, clustered in groups like desperate counting. Elias's stomach tightened. A man had done that. Someone had been inside, wanting to keep track of time, or days, or nights. Elias turned away quickly before anyone noticed him looking. That evening, the second rhythm returned again. The same tightening, the same hurried movement, the same silent terror. But this time, Elias watched that empty cabin as they passed. He noticed Henry's gaze flick toward it too, fast, controlled, as if even a glance was dangerous. Elias felt a spark inside him, fear mixed with certainty. That cabin mattered. That cabin was part of the rule. Maybe it was the cabin that had been chosen before. Elias followed everyone into his own cabin and sat down. The humming began again, softer tonight, almost like it was farther away. But Elias couldn't focus on the sound anymore. His mind was on the empty cabin near the trees, on the scratch marks, on the boarded window, on the way people avoided it as if it could bite. Elias waited until the cabin settled into its nightly paralysis, until the humming moved away and the footsteps did not come close tonight. Hours later, when breathing became heavy around him, Elias made a decision. Not a brave one, a stupid one perhaps. But some decisions are made not because a man is fearless, but because his fear is no longer enough to keep him still. He sat up. Slowly, Jude shifted on his bedding, mumbling, but didn't wake. Elias waited. Silence. He crawled toward the door. The crack under it showed moonlight, thin and pale. Elias paused, listening. No humming, no footsteps. The air outside seemed still. He eased the door open just enough to slip through, careful to keep it from creaking. The yard outside was cold and silver. Shadows stretched long. The cabins stood like sleeping animals. Elias's heart pounded so hard he thought the entire plantation might hear it. He moved low, staying near the shadows of the cabins as he crept toward the empty one. Every step felt loud. Every breath felt like a confession. He reached the empty cabin side and froze. Up close it felt different. Not colder exactly. Not warmer either. Just wrong. The air around it seemed thick, like water. Elias reached for the door frame, fingers trembling. The wood was rough and dry, but beneath that dryness he thought he felt something like a faint vibration, as if the cabin itself carried memory. He pulled his hand back, startled. He leaned toward the crooked door and listened. Nothing. Then, slowly, he pressed the door inward. It moved with a soft groan. Elias winced, waiting for shouting, for boots, for a whip crack. Nothing happened. The door opened enough to reveal blackness inside. Elias stared into it, throat tight. The cabin smelled like old smoke and damp wood and something else beneath. Something metallic, faint, like iron left in rain. He stepped inside. Moonlight slid through cracks and lit dust in the air. The inside was emptier than Elias expected. No bedding, no bowls, no signs of life, except the scratch marks were everywhere, not just by the door, along the walls, across the floorboards, deep lines carved into the wood like a desperate person trying to dig their way out without leaving. Elias swallowed hard. Then he saw something on the far wall, a shape, a cloth bundle hanging from a nail. Elias moved toward it, slow as if approaching a snake. He lifted the bundle down gently. It was heavier than it looked. His fingers fumbled at the knot. The cloth opened to reveal a small book, not a Bible, not a ledger, something plain, bound in worn leather, edges frayed. Elias stared at it like it was impossible. A book like this wouldn't be left for them. It wouldn't be allowed. He opened it carefully. The pages were filled with cramped writing, uneven letters, shaky strokes, as if written by someone who had learned letters in secret. Elias's breath caught. He couldn't read every word quickly, not in this light, but he caught pieces, dates, names, fragments, and one line written darker, pressed hard into the paper. "Do not be outside when it hums." Elias's hands trembled. He flipped the page. Another line beneath a list of nights was written in a different hand, sharper, cleaner. "It does not belong to them." Elias's heart slammed. He heard a sound behind him, not footsteps, not humming. A soft scrape, like wood against wood. Elias froze. The crooked door, he hadn't shut it fully, was slowly moving, closing, not from wind, not from his hand, closing as if something outside had touched it. Elias's blood went cold. He backed away from the door, clutching the book to his chest. The door continued to swing inward, slow and patient. Elias's mind screamed at him to run, to force it open, to burst out. But his body stayed frozen, because in the silence, just before the door fully closed, Elias heard it, a single low hum, not a melody, not a song, a vibration, as if the air itself had begun to sing, and it was coming from the dark outside, right on the other side of the door. The door did not slam. It never rushed. It closed the way a decision closes, slow, certain, impossible to argue with once it has begun. Elias stood frozen inside the empty cabin, the small leather-bound book clutched against his chest like a shield he did not trust. The low hum outside deepened, not louder but fuller, as if the night itself had found a voice and was testing it. The door moved another inch. Elias's breath came shallow. His mind raced through useless options, run, hide, shout. None of them fit the moment. None of them felt possible. The humming shifted again, closer now, intimate. It did not feel curious. It felt aware. Elias took one step back, his heel bumping into something on the floor. The sound, soft but real, echoed in the silence like a confession. The humming stopped. The sudden absence of sound was worse than the sound itself. Elias's ears rang. His heart hammered so violently he thought it might betray him. The door paused. Elias swallowed and forced his body to move. He did the only thing that made sense, to a man whose fear had nowhere left to go. He spoke. "I didn't mean—" The words came out hoarse, barely air. "I didn't know." Silence. Elias's mind screamed at him that speaking was a mistake, that Henry had warned him not to listen, not to think, not to draw attention. But it was too late. The night already knew where he was. He backed farther into the cabin, pressing his shoulders against the far wall. The scratch marks dug into his skin through his shirt sharp as teeth. Then the humming returned, not from one direction, from everywhere. It vibrated through the wood beneath his feet, through the walls, through his bones. Elias felt it in his chest like a second heart had begun to beat inside him. The door creaked open again, just a fraction. Moonlight slid in, pale and thin, illuminating dust in the air. Elias stared at the gap, expecting a shape, a shadow, a face. Nothing appeared. But the hum intensified, resonating with a strange familiarity, like something remembered rather than heard. Elias's fingers tightened around the book. The words he had seen burned in his mind. "Do not be outside when it hums. It does not belong to them." "Doesn't belong to who?" Elias whispered, the question escaping him before he could stop it. The humming changed, not in pitch, in intent. It felt as if the night had leaned closer, listening. Then, softly, impossibly, the humming layered itself into something else. A breath, not Elias's, another. Slow. Controlled, standing just beyond the door. Elias's legs shook. He slid down the wall until he was sitting, knees drawn to his chest like a child hiding from thunder. The door opened another inch. Still no shape. Still no face. Just the presence. Elias's vision blurred with panic. He squeezed his eyes shut, pressing the book hard against himself as if it could anchor him to the world. Then suddenly, the humming cut off. The door stopped moving. The pressure lifted, not gone but loosened, like fingers releasing a throat without stepping away. Elias dared to open his eyes. The door stood ajar, moonlight spilling inside. The yard beyond was empty, still, silent. No footsteps retreated, no shadow moved away. It was as if whatever had been there had simply decided it was finished. Elias waited. 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. Nothing happened. His lungs burned. He realized he had been holding his breath again. Slowly, painfully, Elias forced himself to stand. He did not approach the door. He did not look outside. He stayed where he was until the night fully passed and the sky lightened just enough to promise morning. Only then did he move. Elias tucked the book inside his shirt, tying the cloth tight against his ribs. He slipped out of the empty cabin just as the plantation stirred. Before the rhythm of fear gave way to the rhythm of labor, no one saw him, or if they did, they pretended not to. That day passed like a dream soaked in sweat and cotton dust. Elias worked, nodded when spoken to, flinched when overseers barked orders, but his mind was elsewhere, inside the cabin, at the door, at the humming that had known where he stood. At midday, Henry found him, not abruptly, not why. Accusation. Henry simply appeared beside him while they carried water from the well, his steps matching Elias's as if they had planned it. "You were out," Henry said quietly. It was not a question. Elias's grip tightened on the bucket handle. He kept his eyes on the ground. "Yes." Henry did not react the way Elias expected. There was no anger, no shock, only a long, slow exhale. "You shouldn't have," Henry said. "I know," Elias replied. His voice shook despite his effort to steady it. "But I did." They walked in silence for several steps. "You saw it," Henry said. "I didn't see a face," Elias said quickly. "I didn't see anything. I just felt it." Henry nodded once. "That's enough." They reached the well. Henry set his bucket down but did not bend to fill it. "Listen to me," Henry said, "and listen careful." Elias nodded. "There was a man once," Henry began, "who did more than look." Elias's heart skipped. "The one who—" Henry raised a finger. "Names don't matter, but he lived in that cabin you went into." Elias swallowed. "He wrote the book." Henry's eyes flicked to Elias's chest, to where the book was hidden. A shadow crossed his face. Not surprise, but resignation. "So you found it," Henry said. "Figures." Henry leaned against the well, gaze distant. He wasn't like the rest of us, not afraid the way we were, or maybe he was, but he didn't let it stop him. Elias waited. "He broke the rule," Henry continued. "Not once, not by accident. He broke it over and over." Elias's breath caught. "And he lived." Henry's mouth twisted. "That depends on how you define living." Henry looked around, making sure no one was close enough to hear. Then he lowered his voice further. "The first time it came to him like it came to you, humming, watching, testing." Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine. "The second time," Henry said, "he followed it." Elias's stomach dropped. "Into the woods?" Henry nodded. "Past the trees, past where the ground stops, remembering footsteps." Elias remembered the soil that erased tracks by morning. "He came back," Henry said. "That's the part people forget. He came back the next day, pale and shaking, but breathing." "What did he see?" Elias whispered. Henry's jaw clenched. "He wouldn't say, not at first." They resumed walking, buckets filled, steps slow. "After that," Henry continued, "he started writing, marking nights, counting hums, watching patterns." "The scratches," Elias murmured. "Yes," Henry said. "He said time didn't behave the same way when it hummed. Nights stretched, minutes folded." Elias's mind raced. "Then why did he disappear?" Henry stopped walking. He turned and faced Elias fully. "He didn't disappear," Henry said. "They made sure everyone believed he did, but that's not what happened." Elias's pulse thundered. "Then what?" Henry leaned closer, his voice barely more than breath. "He broke the rule one last time," Henry said, "and the plantation broke with him." Elias frowned. "What do you mean?" Henry's eyes were haunted. "I mean the night he went out for the last time, the humming didn't stop at dawn." Elias's skin prickled. "It stayed," Henry said. "All day, all night. The masters locked themselves inside. Overseers wouldn't go near the woods. Horses screamed in their stalls." "What did he do?" Elias whispered. Henry shook his head slowly. "He didn't do anything. He learned something." They reached the quarters. Henry set his bucket down. "He learned who the rule was really for," Henry said, "and that scared them more than the humming ever did." Elias's thoughts spun. "The rule wasn't for us." Henry met his gaze. "No." "Then why keep it?" Elias asked. "Because it keeps something else," Henry replied. Elias opened his mouth to ask more, but Henry stepped back. "That's all I'll say," Henry warned. "You already know too much." That evening the air felt different, not heavier, expectant. The second rhythm arrived early, tightening the plantation like a drawn wire. People rushed indoors faster than usual. Doors shut harder. Windows were covered. The dogs did not appear at all. Elias sat inside his cabin, the book pressed against his side, Henry's words echoing in his head. He learned who the rule was really for. The humming began, but tonight it was stronger, closer. The sound layered itself through the walls, through Elias's chest, until it felt like his heart was trying to match its rhythm. He thought of the man who had followed. He thought of the last line written in a different hand. It does not belong to them. Elias's breathing grew shallow. The humming moved, not circling, approaching. A shadow passed beneath the door again. This time it did not drift away. The door handle turned, slowly. Someone, or something, was trying to enter. The cabin erupted in silent panic. People pressed back. Someone stifled a cry. The handle stopped. The humming paused. Then a voice, low, rough, human, spoke from the other side of the door. Elias. His blood turned to ice. The voice was not the humming. It was a man's voice, familiar, changed. Elias, it said again. You read my book. Elias's knees buckled. He grabbed the wall to stay upright. The voice continued, calm, almost gentle. I lived, it said, and so can you, but not if you stay afraid. Elias's mouth went dry. Who are you, he whispered. A soft sound came from the door, a laugh, not cruel, not kind, just tired. I'm the man who broke the rule, the voice said, and learned why it exists. The handle turned again. The door began to open. The door opened the width of a breath. Moonlight slid into the cabin like a blade, cutting the darkness just enough to show the pale line of the threshold. The humming had gone quiet, not vanished, not ended, only pulled back, as if the night itself had leaned away to watch. Elias stood frozen, his fingers dug into the wall. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to shove the door closed, to disappear into the safety of obedience. But the voice had spoken his name. No one spoke names during the forbidden hour. The door creaked again, widening. The strip of moonlight lengthened across the floor, touching bare feet, a discarded bowl, the edge of Jude's bedding. Jude lay rigid, eyes wide, staring at the door without blinking. Don't, Jude mouthed, soundless. Elias couldn't answer. A shape filled the doorway, not a shadow, a man. He stood just outside the threshold, refusing to cross it. Moonlight revealed the lines of his face, older than Henry, younger than the stories. His skin looked drawn tight over bone, as if time had pulled him thinner rather than heavier. His hair was streaked with gray and dirt, tied back in a knot that had been retied too many times. His clothes were plantation clothes once, long ago, now mended and remended until the fabric had lost its original shape. But his eyes were awake in a way Elias had never seen. Not wild, not frightened, aware. The man did not look at the others in the cabin. He looked only at Elias. You shouldn't have gone into my place, the man said softly. Elias swallowed. It was empty. The man's mouth curved slightly. Nothing here is empty. The humming stirred again, faint like a distant tide. The man tilted his head, listening, not in fear but in acknowledgement. It's patient tonight, he said. That means we still have time. Henry's warning rang in Elias's ears. If you see someone break it, you didn't see. But the man was standing right there, breathing the same air, speaking words that did not belong to this hour. Who are you? Elias asked, his voice barely more than breath. The man hesitated, then shook his head. Names stick, he said, and sticking is dangerous. He glanced at the others in the cabin for the first time. His gaze moved over them like a hand smoothing water, calming rather than threatening. They'll be safe, he said quietly. It doesn't. Take from crowds. Jude made a small, broken sound. The man looked back to Elias. You read the book? Yes, Elias said, not all of it. That's enough, the man replied. Enough to know why they're afraid. Enough to get me killed? Elias asked. The man smiled, but there was no humor in it. Enough to get you noticed. The humming deepened a fraction as if the night approved of the word come, the man said. Elias's heart slammed. Outside? Yes. Jude shook his head violently, tears streaking his cheeks now. Someone behind Elias clutched his shirt. The man raised a hand, not in command but in promise. I won't take him where he can't come back. Elias met his gaze. You promise? The man considered him. No, he said honestly. I tell the truth. The door opened wider. Cool air spilled into the cabin, carrying the smell of damp earth and leaves. The humming moved with it, wrapping the moment in a low vibration that Elias felt in his teeth. The man stepped aside, clearing the doorway. Now, he said, before it decides for us. Elias closed his eyes. Henry's voice, the overseer's shouts, the scratch marks, the book, the voice at the door. He took one step forward, hands tightened on his shirt. Then he pulled free. The ground outside felt different beneath his feet, not colder, uncertain, as if the earth itself were deciding whether to accept his weight. The man watched him closely. Don't rush, he murmured. The ground remembers fear. Move like you belong. Elias forced his breathing slow. He placed each foot carefully as if stepping onto thin ice. Behind him the door eased shut, not slammed, not hurried. The cabin sealed itself like a held breath. The yard lay empty, silvered by moonlight. The other cabins were dark and closed, their windows blind. The woods loomed ahead, thick and watchful. The humming swelled, not from one place but from everywhere at once. Elias felt it in his ribs and his skull. His thoughts wavered as if the sound pressed against them, testing. "What is it?" Elias asked, his voice trembling despite himself. The man didn't answer right away. He led Elias across the yard, away from the cabins, toward the edge where the trees began. "With them," the man said finally, nodding back toward the main house in the distance, "the rule is obedience. With us," he said, "the rule is silence." They reached the boundary where worked land gave way to wild growth. Vines crept low. Bent strangely, stretching and folding like fabric under careful hands. Elias noticed that his fear had changed. It was still there, sharp and bright, but it no longer paralyzed him. It sharpened his senses instead. He noticed roots before he tripped. He noticed shifts in the air before the path curved. "You're learning," the man said, not turning. "What happens if I stop?" Elias asked. The man stopped walking, the humming stilled, listening. "If you stop," the man said, "you become part of the place." Elias's breath caught. "You mean dead?" The man shook his head. "Worse, useful." They reached a clearing that did not look like one until they stood within it. The trees thinned abruptly, opening onto a circle of ground bare of growth. The soil here was darker, smoother, like polished stone. At the center stood an object Elias did not expect, a post, old, carved, set deep into the earth. Symbols were etched into it, not letters, not numbers. Patterns that made Elias's eyes ache if he stared too long. The humming gathered around the post, thickening, as if this was its anchor. Elias felt a pull toward it, curiosity and dread braided together. "What is this?" he whispered. The man did not answer immediately. He walked to the edge of the clearing and stopped, refusing to step closer. "I can't go farther," he said. Elias turned to him. "Why not?" The man's eyes were sad now. "Because I went too far once." The humming deepened, the sound pressing against Elias's chest. The post seemed to pulse faintly, as if breathing. "Is this what the rule protects?" Elias asked. The man nodded. "And what it protects them from?" "From this?" Elias asked. The man's gaze hardened. "From us knowing what it is." Elias took a step forward. The ground did not erase his footprint here. Instead it held it, firm, accepting. The humming changed. It rose in pitch, sharpening like a warning being revised. "Don't touch it," the man said urgently. "Not yet." Elias froze. His hand hovered inches from the carved surface. The air around the post felt charged, alive, as if the space itself were thinking. "What happens if I do?" Elias asked. The man hesitated. "You stop being afraid," he said, "and that changes everything." The humming surged, no longer patient. Elias felt something press against his mind, images, impressions, not quite memories. A plantation built around this clearing. Men arriving in chains. Masters learning quickly where not to go. A bargain made without words. Elias staggered, clutching his head. "Make it stop." The man stepped closer, gripping Elias's arm. "Focus on me," he said, "not it." Elias locked eyes with him. "Listen," the man said, "the rule says no one goes out when it hums. That keeps everyone ignorant. It keeps this place contained." "Contained from what?" Elias gasped. The man's grip tightened. "From remembering what it was before them." The humming reached a peak, vibrating through the clearing. Then suddenly it shifted, not louder, closer. Elias turned. The trees at the edge of the clearing were moving, not swaying, not bending, but parting, as if something unseen were passing through them. The ground trembled faintly beneath Elias's feet. The man released Elias's arm. "We have to go," he said. "Now." "What about the post?" Elias protested. "You've seen enough," the man snapped. "Any more and it won't let you leave." They ran, not fast. Fast was dangerous, but with urgency that bent time again. The forest seemed to stretch, resist, then finally yield. Behind them the humming followed, no longer patient, no longer curious, annoyed. They burst from the tree line back into the yard just as the first hint of dawn softened the sky. The humming faltered, weakened, then it withdrew, slipping back into the woods like a tide retreating. Elias collapsed to his knees, gasping. The man stood over him, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the trees. "It's learning," he said quietly. "Wah." "T is?" Elias asked. The man looked down at him. "You," he said. Footsteps approached, soft, urgent. Henry emerged from between cabins, eyes wide. He stopped short when he saw Elias on the ground, and the man standing over him. Henry's face went pale. "You shouldn't have brought him there," Henry said. The man met Henry's gaze without flinching. It was time. Henry looked at Elias, fear and something like hope warring in his eyes. Elias pushed himself upright. "The ground doesn't hold footprints," he said hoarsely. "There's a post." Henry closed his eyes. "God help us." The man placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. "You've crossed the first line," he said. "You can't go back to not knowing." Elias looked at the cabins, at the fields beyond, at the main house rising pale in the distance. "I don't want to go back," he said. The man nodded. "Good." The humming was gone now, but the silence it left behind felt thinner than before, as if something beneath the plantation had stirred and would not sleep as easily again. Morning on Whitlow Plantation did not feel like morning. The sky brightened, roosters cried, smoke rose from chimneys. The day performed all the usual signs of beginning, but the air carried something new, thin, unsettled, as if the land itself had been disturbed in its sleep and was now pretending it had not. Elias stood behind his cabin, washing dirt from his hands in a bucket that was already brown from use. His fingers shook slightly when he tried to scrub beneath his nails. He kept seeing the clearing, the dark, smooth earth that held footprints, the carved post pulsing with a presence he could feel even with his eyes closed. And worse than that, he kept hearing the man's voice. "It's learning you." Henry had forced Elias back into the cabin before dawn fully arrived, not with anger but with a quiet urgency that felt like fear wearing a mask of control. "Not a word," Henry had whispered. "Not to anyone. Not even to yourself." Then Henry had looked toward the woods, and Elias saw something in the older man's face that he hadn't seen before. Not fear of masters, fear of the plantation. Elias had worked in silence all morning, his mind split between the cotton in his hands and the post in his memory. His body moved through labor automatically while his thoughts kept circling, returning again and again to the same impossible realization. The rule didn't feel like a rule made by men. It felt like a boundary, a lid, a thing holding something down. At midday, the plantation's ordinary cruelty sharpened. 2 overseers rode down the line, not because people were slow, they rarely were, but because power needed to be seen. One of them, a tall man with a red face and a whip coiled at his hip, stopped near Elias. The overseer's horse snorted, stamping its hoof. Elias kept his eyes down, refusing to meet the man's gaze. The overseer leaned forward in his saddle, sniffing the air like a dog. "You smell like woods," he said. Elias's heart stopped for half a beat. The words were casual, almost bored, but Elias felt the weight behind them. He kept his voice steady. "I was near the well, sir." The overseer's eyes narrowed. "The well don't smell like damp leaves." Elias's mouth went dry. He tried to think of a lie that didn't sound like a lie. Before he could speak, Henry appeared, uninvited, sudden, as if he had been summoned by Elias's fear. "He hauled a barrel yesterday," Henry said, not raising his voice, not lowering it either. "Sweat got into his clothes. Smells sour when it dries." The overseer stared at Henry. "Mind your place," the overseer snapped. Henry bowed his head slightly. "Yes, sir." The overseer studied Elias for another moment. Then he spat into the dirt. "Keep your nose where it belongs," he muttered, and rode on. As soon as the horse's hooves faded, Henry's hand clamped Elias's forearm, hard, not cruel, warning. "After work," Henry said through his teeth. "Behind the smokehouse. You come alone." Elias nodded once. The afternoon crawled. Every sound seemed sharper. Every glance felt heavier. Elias noticed more than he had before, because now he was looking with a different kind of awareness. He noticed that the overseers did not go near the far edge of the plantation, where the woods thickened and the soil darkened. He noticed that the main house never faced the tree line directly. Its windows and porches were angled toward the fields, toward the road, toward the visible world, as if the owners had built it deliberately to avoid looking at what waited behind. He noticed that the horses were kept farther from the woods than any other animals, their stable placed closer to the center like a fortress. And he noticed something else. As the sun leaned toward evening, the masters grew uneasy. Not the women in dresses who moved through the yard with controlled smiles, but the men, the ones who carried the plantation's power like a weapon. Elias saw the master himself, Whitlow, step out onto the porch and scan the horizon with a stiff posture. He spoke with one of the overseers, voice low, his hand gesturing toward the woods in a sharp, irritated motion. The overseer nodded quickly, as if receiving orders he didn't want. Then the master's gaze slid over the field, and paused. Elias could feel it like heat on skin. For a second, just a second, Elias thought the master was looking straight at him. He lowered his head immediately, fingers moving faster in the cotton. But the sensation remained, being noticed in a way that had nothing to do with labor. After work, as people trudged back to the quarters, Elias slipped around the smokehouse the way Henry had instructed. The smokehouse stood squat and dark, its walls stained from years of curing meat that slaves were rarely allowed to eat. The air around it smelled of salt, old grease, and ash. Henry waited behind it, half hidden by stacked wood. The man who had called Elias out, the one who broke the rule, was there too. He stood with his arms folded, eyes on the tree line, as if listening to something too faint for ordinary ears. Elias approached slowly. Henry turned to him, face tight. "You're marked," he said without greeting. Elias swallowed. "Marked?" Henry's eyes flashed. "Don't play foolish. That smell the overseer noticed, that wasn't sweat, that was the woods, the real woods." Elias looked to the other man. "You said it's learning me." The man nodded once, as if confirming a fact rather than offering comfort. "It knows you stepped where you weren't supposed to." Henry made a low sound in his throat, anger or fear, Elias couldn't tell. "And now the masters will know too." Elias frowned. "Why would they care? They want us afraid, they want us inside." Henry's mouth twisted. "They want you inside because they want you ignorant." Elias stared at him. "Ignorant of what?" Henry glanced around, checking the yard, the cabins, the path. No one was close, but Henry still lowered his voice. "Because that rule," Henry said, "ain't theirs. They pretend it is. They act like everything here is theirs." He spit into the dirt, disgusted. "But that thing in the woods, whatever it is, it don't answer to them." Elias felt the hairs lift on his arms. The man, unnamed, finally spoke, voice calm, almost weary. "They didn't build Whitlow on safe land," he said. "They built it on a bargain." Elias leaned forward. "A bargain with what?" The man looked at the woods. Something older than them, something that was here before, fences before cotton, before men decided they could own other men. Henry's eyes squeezed shut, as if he hated hearing the words even though he knew they were true. Elias's mind churned. He pictured the carved post, the symbols that made his eyes ache, the way the humming had gathered around it like a living thing. "What's the bargain?" Elias asked. Henry's gaze snapped back to him. "The bargain is this: they keep people from going out when it hums." Elias's stomach tightened. "And in return," Henry said, voice bitter, "it stays in the woods." The man nodded. "Contained," he murmured. "Not harmless, just held back." Elias struggled to breathe evenly. "So the rule is to protect the masters." Henry's jaw clenched. "Protect their profit," he said. "Protect their lie." Elias stared at them both. "Then why do we obey it?" Henry's eyes burned. "Because if we don't, we get taken," the unnamed man corrected softly. "Not taken," he said. "Chosen." Elias flinched at the word. "Chosen for what?" Elias asked. The man hesitated, then said, "For the same reason you don't leave bait on your porch unless you want something to come close enough to catch." Elias felt nausea rise. "So we're bait." Henry nodded slowly. "We're always bait," he said, voice rough. "For dogs, for overseers, for hunger, for sickness." He swallowed hard. "For the woods, too." Elias's hands curled into fists. "Then why not tell everyone? Why keep the rule in silence?" Henry's laugh was small and broken. "Tell them what? That the woods hum, they already know. That it takes people, they already know." He looked at Elias sharply. "But if you tell them the masters are afraid, if you tell them the masters are not in control," Henry shook his head. "That kind of knowledge spreads like fire, and masters stamp out fire." The unnamed man's eyes met Elias's. "That's why the one thing Whitlow fears more than the humming," he said, "is someone breaking the rule on purpose." Elias's heart pounded. "Because it shows they're afraid. Because it shows they're dependent," the man replied. "And dependency is weakness." Elias thought of Whitlow on his porch, scanning the woods. "What happens if the bargain breaks?" Elias asked. Henry's face went pale. "Don't ask that," he whispered. But Elias couldn't stop. "If people keep going out, if the humming doesn't stop at dawn like you said happened once, what then?" The unnamed man's gaze grew distant. "Then the plantation becomes what it really is," he said. "Not a place of order." "A trap," Elias said. The man nodded. Henry's voice trembled with anger now. "And they'll do anything to keep the trap working." Elias stared at them. "So what do we do?" The unnamed man looked back toward the smokehouse wall as if measuring time. "We prepare," he said. "For what?" Elias asked. "For the moment Whitlow realizes you aren't just curious," the man said. "You're awake." Henry stepped closer, grabbing Elias's shoulder. "Listen," Henry hissed. "You cannot be seen near those woods again. Not once. Not even at dawn. Not even if you think it's safe." Elias nodded slowly. "And the book?" Henry's eyes flicked to Elias's chest. "You hide it better." The unnamed man shook his head. "No," he said. "Not hide. Learn." Elias frowned. "Learn what?" The man took a breath, and for the first time, something like urgency crept into his calm. "The symbols," he said, "in the book, on the post, the marks that make your eyes ache, they aren't just warnings, they're instructions." Elias's mouth went dry. "Instructions for what?" The man's gaze sharpened. "For speaking without sound," he said. "For moving without being followed, for stepping where the ground remembers." Henry looked like he wanted to argue. "We don't need that," he muttered. "We need to live." The unnamed man's eyes did not leave Elias. "Living is not the same as surviving," he said. Elias felt his chest tighten. "You said you went too far once." The man nodded. "I crossed lines I didn't understand. I paid for it." Elias studied him, his thinness, the way his eyes never fully relaxed, the faint tremor in his hands when the wind shifted. "What did it do to you?" The man's mouth tightened. "It didn't hurt me," he said slowly. "Not the way men hurt. It changed what fear meant." Henry spat again, angry. "It hollowed him," he said. The man didn't deny it. Elias's throat tightened. "And why bring me into it?" The man's gaze softened. "Because it already found you," he said. "And because you asked the question the others stopped themselves from asking." Elias remembered himself whispering in the dark, "What did you see?" Elias exhaled shakily. "So Whitlow fears this knowledge?" "Yes," Henry said, "and he'll kill to keep it buried." The unnamed man added, "Or worse, he'll use you." Elias's stomach twisted. "Use me how?" The man's eyes flicked toward the main house, far away but still present like a threat. "If Whitlow believes the bargain is slipping," he said, "he will try to tighten it." Henry's hand tightened on Elias's shoulder. "He'll throw someone to it," Henry whispered. "Deliberate." Elias went cold. "A sacrifice." Henry's face hardened. "Call it what you want, it's the same." The unnamed man's voice dropped low. "And if Whitlow thinks you are connected to it," he said, "he may decide you're the safest offering." Elias's mouth opened, but no words came. A shout rose from the direction of the main house, an overseer calling out. Another voice answered. Boots thudded on a porch. Henry stiffened. "Time," he muttered, echoing the older woman's warning. "Not evening time. Something else." The unnamed man's head tilted, listening. The faintest vibration touched the air, so faint Elias might have imagined it. The man's eyes narrowed. "It's early," he said. Henry's face tightened. "That ain't right." Elias's heart hammered. "What's early?" The unnamed man looked at him. "The hum," he said simply. "It's starting before sunset." Henry's voice turned urgent. "Back to your cabin," he ordered. "Act normal. Don't look scared. Don't look like you know anything." Elias nodded, breath shallow. As he turned to go, the unnamed man caught his arm. "Elias," he said, voice quiet, "tonight do not stay inside just because everyone else does." Elias stared. "You want me to go out?" The man shook his head slightly. "Not out," he corrected. "Near." Elias felt panic rise. "Near what?" The man's eyes held his with unsettling steadiness. "Near the main house," he said. "Because if Whitlow has decided to tighten the bargain, you need to know who he chooses." Elias's blood went cold. "How would I?" "You already learned how to move quietly," the man interrupted. "And you already learned the difference between fear that paralyzes and fear that guides." Henry snapped. "No, he stays in. He's new." The unnamed man did not look at Henry. "He's not new anymore," he said. Elias swallowed hard. The idea of being near the main house at night was madness, but the idea of Whitlow choosing someone, choosing anyone, without anyone knowing, that felt worse. Elias nodded once, reluctantly. "I'll try." The unnamed man released his arm. "Good," he said. Elias started toward the cabins, forcing himself to walk like nothing had happened, but his skin prickled. The air had changed, and when he reached his cabin door, he heard something that made his heart sink into his stomach. Not humming, not yet. Laughter. From the direction of the main house. A man's laughter, Whitlow's, sharp and short, as if he had just made a decision that pleased him. Elias stepped inside his cabin and sat down among the others, pretending his hands were simply tired. He kept his face blank. He kept his breathing steady, but his mind was screaming one thought over and over. Tonight, the rule won't just be obeyed. Tonight, it will be used. The humming began before the sun had finished falling. That was the first wrong thing. Usually, the plantation had its cruel predictability. Daylight for labor, dusk for exhaustion, night for whatever peace could be stolen in silence. The unnamed rule had always waited until the light thinned, until shadows grew long and the world looked softer at the edges. Tonight, it did not wait. Elias felt it while he was still standing outside his cabin. Felt it like a vibration sliding beneath the skin, like a dista. NT drumbeat that wasn't sound but pressure. The older woman 2 doors down, Martha, paused mid-step with her wash basin in her hands. Her eyes went wide. The basin slipped from her fingers and hit the dirt with a dull thud, water spreading like a dark stain. "Inside," she breathed. No one asked why. Doors began to shut. Voices died. Children were pulled by wrists, dragged like sacks if they resisted. Even the air seemed to tighten. Elias stood still for a moment longer than everyone else, his heart hammering. Henry's warning echoed in his head. Get indoors on time. But the unnamed man's instruction pressed harder, near the main house. You need to know who he chooses. Elias forced himself to move. He stepped into his cabin first, because he had to. He had to make it look like obedience. He had to become invisible again, at least long enough for invisibility to be believed. Inside, bodies packed close. The door was pulled almost shut, leaving only a thin crack. Jude's eyes found Elias immediately. Suspicion and fear mixed together. Jude mouthed, "Don't." Elias sat down on his bedding and tried to look like a man settling in for a night of enforced stillness. The humming deepened. It rolled through the walls like breath, through hollow bones. A baby whimpered and was silenced with a hand and a prayer. Then footsteps, outside, too soon, too close. The same deliberate pace, not an overseer's stomp, not a worker's rush, something that moved like it had all the time in the world. The cabin froze as one. Elias felt sweat gather at his temples. He stared at the strip of light beneath the door. A shadow slid over it. It lingered. Then, slowly, it moved on. A collective exhale shivered through the room. But Elias did not relax, because tonight wasn't like the others. Tonight, the humming had started early, and the plantation's fear felt sharper, like it wasn't only the enslaved holding their breath. It was the land. Elias waited. He counted heartbeats the way he had counted cotton bolls in the field. He listened for the moment the cabin's breathing grew heavier, the moment bodies sank into exhaustion enough to stop watching him. Finally, Jude's head drooped. Someone began to snore softly. Elias moved, slow, careful. He crawled toward the door like he was returning to last night's mistake, except tonight the mistake had purpose. He eased the door open just enough to slip through. The yard was silver gray, dusk fading into night. The sky still held a weak strip of light near the horizon, but the humming made it feel like full darkness anyway. Elias stayed low, moving in the shadow lines between cabins. He did not run. Running would make sound. Running would attract eyes. And there were eyes tonight, not only in the woods. He saw a lantern bobbing near the stables, an overseer moving with restless energy. Another lantern near the smokehouse. Men posted like sentries. They weren't watching the quarters. They were watching the woods. Elias's stomach tightened. Whitlow was afraid, and a frightened master was the most dangerous kind. Elias moved farther from the cabins, keeping close to fences and tool sheds, letting structures block him from the open yard. The humming pulsed in his chest like a second heartbeat. As he approached the main house, the air changed again. It smelled cleaner here. Polished wood, oil lamps, horse sweat kept at a distance by privilege. The ground was trimmed, the grass shorter, the path swept. But even here, Elias felt the tension, like the main house was a ship creaking under pressure it didn't want to admit. He reached the edge of the garden hedges and crouched behind them. From here he could see the porch. Whitlow stood there, not in a robe, not relaxed like a man at home. He wore a dark coat buttoned tight as if cold had nothing to do with weather. His hair was combed back. A lamp hung by the door, throwing light across his face and making his eyes look like two hard stones. Two overseers stood near him, hats in their hands like boys being scolded, and with them, a third figure, a man from the quarters. Elias's throat tightened. The man stood straight, hands at his sides, shoulders squared in a way that looked like courage until you noticed how still he was. His face was half lit by the lamp. Elias recognized him. Caleb. Caleb was not young, but he was strong. He worked in the fields and sometimes in the barns. He laughed once, months ago, at a joke someone told. An actual laugh, brief but real. And Elias had remembered it because laughter on Whitlow felt like an act of rebellion. Caleb was also known for one thing. He never ran inside early. He always walked. Not slow, not fast. Just unhurried, as if he refused to let fear control his pace. Elias's chest went cold. Whitlow's voice floated down, sharp and controlled. "You understand what I'm asking," Whitlow said. Caleb's reply was too quiet to hear. Whitlow stepped closer, lamplight cutting across his features. "You understand," he repeated, louder. Caleb lifted his chin slightly. He said something again, still too quiet. One of the overseers shifted, uneasy. Whitlow's mouth curled into something almost like satisfaction. "Good," he said, "then you'll do it." Elias's hands trembled. He pressed them into the dirt to steady himself. Caleb turned his head slightly, glancing toward the dark, beyond the garden, the direction of the woods. Elias followed his gaze. The tree line was far from here, but the humming felt stronger when Caleb looked that way, as if attention itself fed it. Whitlow gestured toward the yard. A fourth man stepped out of the shadows, another overseer, holding something long in his hands. At first Elias thought it was a rifle. Then the light caught it. It was a lantern on a pole, built to carry flame higher, brighter. Not for finding lost things, for being seen, for being noticed. Elias's stomach twisted. They weren't sending Caleb into the woods to hide. They were sending him to be visible. Elias's mind flashed to Henry's words, "He'll throw someone to it." Deliberate. Caleb hesitated. Whitlow leaned close, saying something that made Caleb's shoulders stiffen. Then Caleb nodded once. The overseer handed him the tall lantern pole. Caleb took it. The flame lit his face from below, turning his eyes into dark hollows. Whitlow stepped back. "Go," he said simply. Caleb turned and walked off the porch, down the steps, onto the path that led away from the main house. Not toward the quarters, toward the woods. Elias's mouth went dry. He wanted to run, toward Caleb, toward Henry, toward anyone. He wanted to shout, to warn. But the whole plantation was built on punishing loudness. A shout would not save Caleb. A shout would only mark Elias. So Elias did the only thing he could do. He followed. He stayed low behind hedges and trees, using the garden's shadows to keep pace without being seen. Caleb walked steadily, the lantern pole held upright like a strange torch. The flame swayed with his steps, casting moving light across the ground. The humming deepened the farther Caleb went. Elias felt it in his teeth now. In his skull. It was as if the plantation itself had become an instrument, and the humming was the note being played through it. Caleb reached the open field line where the neat yard ended and wild land began. The overseers did not follow him beyond a certain point. Elias saw them stop near a fence post, shifting uneasily, watching. Whitlow stayed on the porch, a dark silhouette against lamplight, like a man watching a performance he'd paid for. Caleb continued alone. The lantern flame rose high enough to make him visible from far away. Elias crept closer, staying in tall grass. He could see Caleb's face now, tight with controlled fear. Not panic, not hysteria, just the strain of a man forcing himself forward because someone else's life depended on it. Because that was what masters do. They didn't just threaten you. They arranged the world so you would choose the thing that killed you. Caleb reached the tree line. He stopped. The humming paused. As if the woods were listening, then the humming resumed, layered now with something else. A softer tone beneath it. Almost like a second voice joining the first. Caleb's shoulders rose as he took a breath. He lifted the lantern pole slightly, as if offering the flame to the darkness. Elias held his breath. The trees did not move. No shadow stepped out. No beast appeared. Nothing obvious happened. For a heartbeat, Elias thought, maybe it won't come. Then the ground beneath Caleb changed, not crumbling, not shifting like mud, but smoothing, darkening, becoming the same kind of polished earth Elias had seen in the clearing. Caleb looked down sharply, startled. Elias's heart slammed. The woods were bringing the boundary to Caleb, not waiting for him to step in. Caleb took one step back. The print he made vanished, instantly, erased as if he had never moved. Caleb's breath hitched. The lantern flame flickered. Elias saw Caleb's fingers tighten around the pole. The humming swelled, and then, without warning, the lantern flame steadied, not from Caleb's control, from something else. It steadied as if a hand had cupped it, shielding it from wind that wasn't there. Caleb froze. Elias watched, eyes burning. A shape formed in the darkness, not a body, not a person. More like the absence of light bending into a suggestion of presence. The air around Caleb thickened, pressing close. Caleb did not scream. He didn't run. He stood there, trembling, as if he had decided fear would not be the last thing he did. Then Caleb spoke. His voice carried faintly across the field, thin but clear. "I did what you wanted," Caleb said. Elias's blood ran cold. Caleb wasn't talking to Whitlow. He wasn't talking to overseers. He was talking to the woods. Elias realized, with a sick twist, that Whitlow had likely instructed him what to say, or threatened him into saying it. Caleb swallowed hard. "I came when it hummed," he continued. "I came with light." The humming paused again, then it shifted, closer, denser. Caleb's face tightened. He looked like a man standing at the edge of water he knew could drown him. "And I want," Caleb began, voice cracking. He stopped. He swallowed. He forced the words out. "I wanted to stay in the woods," he said. Elias felt nausea rise, the bargain. Whitlow was speaking through Caleb. Caleb was being used to renew the boundary, to feed the containment, to remind whatever lived there that the masters still honored the rule. Caleb's shoulders shook. He squeezed his eyes shut briefly, then opened them again. "Take what you need," Caleb whispered. Elias's chest tightened so hard it hurt. The moment Caleb said it, the lantern flame flared, bright, too bright, casting harsh light over the trees and making the darkness behind them look like a wall. Then the flame snapped low again, as if sucked downward. The humming surged. The air around Caleb shimmered, not with heat but with pressure, like the world was bending around him. Elias fought the urge to move. His muscles screamed to run, to intervene, to do something, anything. But he was pinned by terror and the knowledge that stepping into that boundary could erase him too. Caleb's knees buckled. He caught himself, gripping the lantern pole so hard his knuckles turned white. He gasped, not from pain, but from a sudden lack of air, as if the atmosphere had been stolen from his lungs. Elias saw Caleb's mouth open, trying to breathe. The humming became deeper, almost a growl beneath the soft tones. Then, quietly, Caleb began to hum. Elias froze. Caleb was humming the same wordless tone, not because he chose to, because it was being pulled through him. His eyes rolled slightly, unfocused. The lantern pole tipped. Elias's heart slammed as the flame leaned toward thud. He ground. And then, as if guided, the pole set itself upright again. Caleb's hands were no longer controlling it. Elias' stomach dropped. Caleb's body swayed like a man sleepwalking. The humming from his throat merged with the humming in the woods, until Elias couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. And then, slowly, Caleb took a step forward, into the tree line. The ground beneath him smoothed again, held him, accepted him. Caleb's footprint did not erase this time. It held. The boundary had changed. It was letting him be remembered, which meant Elias's breath caught. It meant Caleb wasn't being taken like the others, vanishing into rumor. He was being claimed in a different way. Caleb disappeared into the trees, not dragged, not yanked, just walked in. The humming faded gradually, like a song ending without a final note. The lantern flame remained at the edge of the trees, standing upright as if planted there. It burned steadily, alone. Elias stayed crouched in the grass, trembling so hard his teeth clicked. Behind him the overseers murmured among themselves. Elias heard one say, "That's done." Another voice replied, "Master'll sleep tonight." Elias felt something crack inside him. Not a bone, not a scream. Something quieter, a certainty. This was not superstition. This was a system, a ritual, a machine built of fear and bodies. Caleb was not the first offering. He would not be the last. Elias crawled backward through the grass, staying low until the main house yard came into view again. Whitlow was still on the porch, watching the lantern at the tree line like a man watching a candle burn down. Elias saw Whitlow turn to an overseer and say something Elias couldn't hear. The overseer nodded, then walked away quickly, already moving to enforce the next instruction. Whitlow remained still. Then Whitlow did something that made Elias's stomach twist tighter. Whitlow smiled, not wide, not happy, satisfied, as if a pressure in his life had been relieved, as if he had just paid a debt with someone else's bloodless life. Elias backed away farther, using shadow and fence lines to return toward the quarters. The humming was gone now. The rule hour had passed, and the plantation moved again, quietly, cautiously, like a man after a storm checking what damage was done. Elias slipped back into his cabin before dawn. Bodies lay in uneasy sleep. Jude stirred when Elias crept in, eyes half open. "You went," Jude whispered, voice shaking. Elias didn't answer. He lay down on his bedding, staring at the ceiling. His chest felt hollow. His hands felt dirty in a way water could never fix. Jude leaned closer. "Who?" he whispered. "Who did they take?" Elias's throat tightened. He should have stayed silent. Henry said not to speak, but silence was what made the machine run. Elias turned his head slightly and whispered, "Caleb." Jude made a small sound, half sob, half prayer. "He had a wife," Jude breathed. "He had—" Elias shut his eyes hard. "I know." Jude's voice cracked. "They'll say he ran." Elias felt heat behind his eyes. "They'll say whatever keeps the rest of us inside." Jude trembled. "And if someone asks—" Elias opened his eyes, staring into the dark. "I'll tell them the truth," he whispered. Jude recoiled slightly, terrified. "You'll die." Elias's voice was flat, not brave, just certain. "Maybe," he said. "But if I don't, Caleb disappears twice." Dawn came, work came. And as the plantation woke, Elias watched the masters' faces. He saw something he hadn't noticed before, something that made his blood run cold with clarity. The masters did not look relieved after last night. They looked cautious, because the boundary had changed. The hum had begun early. The ground had held Caleb's footprint. The lantern still burned at the tree line when the morning mist rose, bright and stubborn, visible proof that something had happened. And Whitlow stared at it with the expression of a man realizing he'd fed a thing that was growing hungrier. Elias understood then what the unnamed man meant by the cost of knowing. Knowing didn't just make you afraid, it made you responsible. Because now Elias could not unsee Caleb walking into the woods. He could not unknow that Whitlow had offered him like a coin. He could not return to being a man who survived by looking away. And somewhere deep in Elias's chest beneath fear, a new thought formed. Quiet, dangerous, alive. If Whitlow could choose an offering, then someone could choose to stop him. They said Caleb ran. They said it the way men say rain is coming. Like it was ordinary, like it was weather, like it could not be stopped and therefore did not need to be examined. By sunrise, the story was already moving through the quarters in whispers stitched with fear. Ran off in the night, one woman murmured while stirring thin porridge. Must have stole something, a man muttered, eyes down. Dogs didn't track, someone else added, and that sentence ended in silence, because everyone knew what it meant when the dogs didn't track. Elias listened without reacting. He forced his face into the blank mask everyone wore to survive. But inside him, something had tightened. Not rage like fire, rage like iron. Caleb hadn't run. Caleb had walked into the woods under a master's order, with a lantern held high like a signal. And the woods had accepted him. The proof still burned. From the field, even at midday, Elias could see it, a pale flicker at the tree line, stubborn against sunlight, wrong in a way that made his stomach knot. A lantern flame should have died hours ago. This one did not. The overseers noticed it too, they pretended not to. But Elias saw them glance toward the woods more often than usual, their confidence thinning like cloth worn at the elbows. One of them rode near the edge and then turned away quickly, spitting as if the sight had soured his mouth. Whitlow remained inside the main house longer than normal. When he did appear, it was not with the lazy ease of a man who owned the day. It was with the stiff posture of a man guarding a crack in his wall. At lunch, Henry found Elias the same way he always did, like a shadow choosing the right moment. They stood near the water barrels, bodies angled so their mouths could move without their words carrying. "You saw," Henry said quietly. Elias nodded once. Henry's eyes were darker today. "Then you know what they'll do next." Elias swallowed. "They'll make an example." Henry's jaw tightened. "And they'll do it before the story becomes anything other than what they said." Elias stared at the field rose, hands stained with cotton sap. "You told me silence keeps the machine running." Henry's gaze flicked to him sharply. "And you think noise will stop it?" "I think truth might," Elias said. Henry's expression twisted like he wanted to spit, but he didn't. "Truth gets you killed," he murmured, "and then they'll still feed the woods only with your body." Elias's chest tightened. "The lantern is still burning." Henry's eyes moved toward the tree line, just a fraction. "That's the problem," he said. Elias frowned. "It's proof." "No," Henry corrected. "It's a message." Elias felt cold creep up his spine. "From who?" Henry didn't answer. He looked away as if the answer was too heavy to say. Elias opened his mouth again, but Henry cut him off. "After work," Henry said, voice low. "Behind the old corn shed, you, me?" His eyes flicked toward the man who broke the rule, and him. Elias nodded. The day dragged. Every time Elias turned in the row, he saw overseers moving in patterns he hadn't noticed before. More patrols, more eyes, more men posted near paths that led toward the woods. They weren't protecting anything from slaves. They were guarding something from being approached. But fear does not only tighten. Sometimes fear makes mistakes, and Elias sensed the plantation. Making one. When the sun lowered, the humming began early again. Not as early as the previous night, but early enough to make every worker's spine stiffen. Martha whispered time with a trembling voice, pulling a child close as if the air itself had teeth. People rushed toward the cabins, but the masters did something unusual. They lit more lamps around the main house, more than necessary, as if light could hold the night at bay. Elias pretended to follow everyone inside. He sat on his bedding, waited for the cabin to settle, for breathing to deepen, for Jude's suspicious eyes to drift shut. Then he slipped out again. This time he did not go toward the main house. He went toward the old corn shed, where Henry had instructed. The shed stood half-rotted near the edge of the cleared land, wood warped by weather. It smelled like dry husks and old mice. Henry was already there, hunched in shadow. The unnamed man stood beside him, still as a post. In the dimness, his eyes looked even sharper, like night had carved them that way. Elias approached quietly. "They're saying Caleb ran." Henry's mouth tightened. "They always say that." The unnamed man's gaze was fixed on the tree line. "It didn't take him the way it takes others," he said. Elias swallowed. He walked in. The man nodded, and it kept the print. Henry's shoulders tensed. "That's what's wrong," he muttered. Elias frowned. "Why is that wrong?" The unnamed man answered softly. "Because when the ground holds your footprint, it means the place knows you." Elias's skin prickled. "Knows you, like recognizes?" "Like claims," Henry said bitterly. The unnamed man's voice remained calm. "Last night, Whitlow didn't just feed it," he said. "He taught it." Elias's chest tightened. "Taught it what?" Henry looked at Elias, eyes grim. "That masters can choose," he said. that a man can be sent like a message. The unnamed man tilted his head slightly, listening. The hum was faint right now, like a distant wire singing. It didn't like being used, the man murmured. Elias stared. How do you know? The unnamed man's eyes flicked to Elias's chest, where the book still hid beneath cloth. Because you felt it shift, he said. The hum started early, the boundary moved, it steadied the lantern flame. Elias remembered the way the flame had flared and then dropped as if something had breathed it in. Henry's voice tightened. You think it's angry? The unnamed man didn't answer immediately. He watched the woods as if watching a face he couldn't fully see. I think it's awake, he said finally, and I think it's learning what power looks like on this land. Elias's mouth went dry. Then what happens now? Henry's laugh was quiet and joyless. Now Whitlow tries to tighten the bargain again, he said, because he'll think one offering wasn't enough. Elias felt his stomach twist. Another person. Henry nodded. Soon, the unnamed man's gaze sharpened. But if Whitlow tries again, he said, the rule may not behave the way it used to. Elias frowned. What do you mean? The man looked at Elias fully. I mean the rule might enforce itself, he said. Not through masters, through the land. Henry's face went pale. No, he whispered. No, no, Elias felt cold dread. What does that look like? The unnamed man opened his mouth and stopped. The humming rose sharply, like a cord plucked too hard. All three men froze. The air thickened, not near the woods. Everywhere, Elias felt the hum run under his feet like a living thing. Henry's lips parted, but no sound came out. The unnamed man whispered, too close. Elias's heart slammed. It's here? The hum deepened. Then the strangest thing happened. The plantation's dogs, usually quiet during the hour, began to howl, not bark, howl. A long, trembling sound that filled the night with panic. Lanterns in the distance flickered wildly as if wind had swept through, except the trees did not move. A shout O's from the direction of the main house. Get inside, a white voice screamed. An overseer, frantic. Another voice replied, sharp with authority. Whitlow. Elias couldn't make out the words, but he heard the tone, command laced with fear. Henry grabbed Elias's arm hard. Back, he hissed. Back now. Elias resisted. What's happening? The unnamed man's hand shot out, gripping Elias's other arm. His grip was cold and steady. It's moving, he said quietly. Elias's throat tightened. What's moving? The unnamed man's eyes lifted toward the main house. The boundary, he said. The humming surged again, louder than Elias had ever heard it. It vibrated through the corn shed boards, through Elias's bones. He felt like his teeth might crack. Then, farther off, Elias saw something he could barely understand. The lantern at the tree line flared, not bigger, brighter. For a heartbeat, the flame blazed so white it looked like a star pressed to earth. Then it shot upward, straight up, as if pulled by an unseen hand. The pole rose too, lifting out of the ground like a weed yanked from soil. Elias stared, mouth open, unable to breathe. The lantern floated. It drifted away from the woods, toward the plantation, toward the main house. Henry made a strangled sound. God, he whispered. The unnamed man's voice was flat. It's carrying the offering back. Elias's stomach dropped. Caleb? The man didn't answer. He didn't have to. The lantern moved steadily through the air, flame unwavering, like it was being walked by something invisible. It passed above the fields, above fences, above men who froze where they stood, staring up. Whitlow's porch lit up with frantic movement. Lamps were being carried out. Men shouted. Elias couldn't hear the words clearly, but he felt the panic ripple through them. The lantern descended slowly onto the main house yard, and then, only then, did Elias understand why the masters feared the rule more than the enslaved did. Because the rule didn't just keep slaves inside, it kept something else contained. And now that something else was stepping into the open, the humming dropped suddenly, as if the whole plantation held its breath. A silence followed so complete it felt violent. Elias could hear his own blood. Then from the direction of the main house, a sound rose. A man's voice, not Whitlow's, not an overseer's. A voice that belonged to someone who shouldn't be speaking. It came slow, rough, as if dragged out of a throat that hadn't used words in a long time. Master Whitlow, the voice said. Elias's skin went cold. Henry's grip tightened so hard it hurt. The unnamed man's eyes widened slightly, his calm cracking for the first time. That's him, Henry whispered. That's... Elias didn't need the name. He knew Caleb, but Caleb's voice sounded wrong. Not possessed, not monstrous, just emptied, as if something else had hollowed him and left the shape behind. Whitlow's voice rang out tight. Where is he? Caleb's voice answered softly, almost kindly. Here, it said. Then a sound like a door opening, wood creaking, hinges groaning, came from the main house yard, not the main house door, something else. a threshold that shouldn't exist. Elias's head spun. He couldn't see clearly from this distance, but he saw lantern light flicker strangely, bending in the air like heat haze. He saw Whitlow step backward. He saw an overseer stumble and fall, and through it all the humming returned, low, satisfied, like a creature purring. Henry's voice shook. "It's not supposed to cross," he whispered. "It's not supposed to come here." The unnamed man's gaze locked on the yard. "It can," he murmured, "if the bargain is broken." Elias swallowed hard. Did Whitlow break it? The unnamed man's jaw tightened. "He tried to use it," he said. "He tried to command it through an offering." Henry's voice turned bitter. "And it don't like commands." A sudden scream ripped through the air, an OV. Ursier's scream, sharp and terrified. It cut off abruptly like a string snapped. Elias's stomach lurched, more shouting. Whitlow's voice louder now, furious, ordering men to do something. But men cannot fight a rule. Men can only pretend they control it, until the rule reminds them otherwise. The humming swelled, vibrating through the plantation, and Elias felt it pull at him the way it had pulled in the woods. Only now it pulled toward the main house, toward whatever threshold had opened there. Elias took an involuntary step forward. Henry yanked him back. "No," Henry hissed. "You ain't going there." Elias's voice shook. "We have to see." Henry's eyes were wild. Seeing is what kills. The unnamed man released Elias's arm slowly. "He's right," he said quietly. "But you're right too." Elias stared at him. "What do you mean?" The man's eyes held Elias's with grim certainty. "If the rule is breaking back," he said, "this is the moment everything changes." Henry's breathing was ragged. "It'll punish us too." The unnamed man nodded. "It punishes imbalance," he said, "and this plantation is built on imbalance." Elias looked toward the cabins. Dark, silent, full of people pretending not to hear. Then toward the main house. Lit, chaotic, full of masters suddenly helpless. And he understood something that made his chest tighten. The rule had always been a cage. But tonight, the cage door was swinging, not for the enslaved, for the masters. Another scream rang out, closer this time. And then, amid the chaos, Caleb's voice rose again, clearer, calmer, as if speaking a final statement to be remembered. "You fed me to keep it contained," Caleb said. "Now it knows your shape." A pause, then Caleb added, almost like a prayer. "And it is hungry for what you called yours." The humming deepened into something like laughter. Whitlow shouted something Elias couldn't hear. Then the lanterns around the porch flickered, one by one, until the yard dimmed. Not dark. Dim in a way that felt like the world was being covered by a hand. Henry's voice was shaking. "We have to get inside." Elias didn't move. He felt a pull, stronger now, like the humming recognized him too. The unnamed man stepped close and spoke into Elias's ear. "It knows you crossed," he whispered. "It knows you saw. That's why it's moving like this." Elias's throat tightened. "So what do I do?" The unnamed man's voice was steady, urgent. "You decide what you are," he said. "Bait or blade." Elias swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the main house yard where the light bent strangely, where Whitlow's power sounded suddenly small. Another sound rose, wood cracking, like something heavy pressing, through a doorway that wasn't meant to exist. Elias felt the pull become almost unbearable. He took a step. Henry grabbed his arm again. "Elias, no." Elias looked at Henry, eyes burning. "If I don't move now," he whispered, "Caleb disappears twice." Henry's grip trembled. Then Henry released him, just for a heartbeat. Enough. Elias moved forward, slow, careful, toward the main house, toward the bending light, toward the moment the rule no one spoke was no longer contained by silence. And behind him, the humming followed, low and patient, like it had been waiting for him to choose. Elias walked as if the ground might change, its mind. Each step toward the main house felt like stepping into someone else's dream, one he had never been invited into, one he had been beaten into avoiding. The yard ahead glowed wrong. Lantern light bent in the air like heat, but the night was cold. Shadows pulled longer than they should. The porch looked closer and farther at the same time, as if distance had become uncertain. Behind Elias, the quarters were sealed tight, cabins like clenched fists. No cries, no calls, no prayers loud enough to be heard. The plantation had become a single held breath. In front of him, the master's world was unraveling. Another scream cut through the air, high, terrified, and then ended too fast, like the sound had been swallowed by the lawn itself. Elias's stomach lurched, but he forced himself onward. He didn't run. Running felt like panic, and panic felt like permission for the night to choose for him. The hedge line gave him one last shadow to hide in. He crouched, eyes fixed on the porch. Whitlow stood at the top of the steps, coat buttoned tight, face lit from below by lanterns that flickered as if the air refused to behave. Overseers moved like frightened animals, rushing, stopping, rushing again. And in the center of the yard, upright without hands, burned the lantern pole Caleb had carried. Its flame was wrong, too white, too steady, casting a circle of light that didn't spread. It pooled like liquid. It clung to the grass. Within it the air looked thick, as if the world's skin had been stretched thin. A threshold. Elias felt it tug at him the same way the woods had, only now it tugged from the heart of the master's ground. Whitlow's voice cracked through the yard. "Shoot it!" A rifle rose. The shot rang, then died too fast, swallowed as if sound had fallen into a mouth. The bullet flashed through the white flame and vanished like it had dropped through a hole. The overseer stared at his weapon, disbelief replacing arrogance. "Again!" Whitlow barked. Another crack, another swallowed sound, another vanishing. The humming, low and full, deepened into something like amusement. Then Caleb's voice rose from within the circle. "Master Whitlow." Elias couldn't see Caleb clearly. He could only see the suggestion of a man shape inside the bending light, there then fading like the world couldn't decide whether to keep him. Whitlow snapped back, "Where is he?" Caleb answered softly, almost kindly. "Here." Two overseers surged forward with lanterns raised, stepping into the circle's edge. Their flames flickered hard, their faces twisting. One stumbled back, breathless. The other strained forward as if pushing into deep water. Then his lantern went dark, not blown out but pulled down, snapped into blackness. He fell to his knees, scrambling backward on hands and elbows like the grass burned him. Whitlow cursed them, furious. But Elias saw the truth in the master's posture. Rage was trying to cover fear. The circle expanded again, slow, deliberate, like a mouth opening wider. Shadows lengthened. The air pressed closer. Whitlow's eyes narrowed, thinking like a man used to forcing reality into obedience. He snapped at an overseer. "Bring her." Elias's blood went cold. From the porch shadow, two men dragged a woman forward. Her dress was torn, her mouth gagged, her eyes wide with a terror so old it looked practiced. Martha, the one who whispered time. The one who pulled children inside first. Whitlow gripped her arm and leaned close, murmuring something Elias couldn't hear. Martha's eyes squeezed shut as if the words cut her. Then Whitlow shoved her toward the circle and shouted, "You want one? Take one!" The humming surged so sharply Elias felt it in his teeth. Martha stumbled, gag breath ragged. She tried to back away. Whitlow shoved her again, harder. Elias could not watch her be made into a message. He rose from behind the hedge and stepped into the open. "Stop!" an overseer shouted, moving toward him, and froze as the circle brushed near his boots. His courage collapsed against the boundary like paper against rain. Elias kept walking, Whitlow's gaze locked onto him, fury and disbelief mixing. "What the hell?" Elias spoke, voice carrying across the lawn. "Don't." The word landed between Martha and the circle like a hand catching her. Martha's eyes found Elias. In them, fear flickered. Then something else, recognition. Not that she knew him well, but that she knew what it meant for someone to speak. Whitlow lifted his hand as if to strike her into motion again. Elias reached her first and caught Whitlow's wrist. Whitlow recoiled, as if to touch itself in. Salted him. "How dare you? You're afraid," Elias said. Whitlow's face twisted. "I'll have you. You're afraid of what you can't own." Elias cut in, and turned his gaze to the bending light instead of the master. "You don't belong to them," Elias said toward the threshold. The humming paused, the air tightened, listening. The lantern flame steadied, bright and still. Elias knelt and tore the cloth from Martha's mouth. She coughed, choking on air, whispering, Don't say things, boy." "You already knew," Elias murmured. "You just survived it." Whitlow roared, "Shoot him!" The rifle rose again. The trigger pulled. Click. Nothing. The gun failed like a tool refusing its owner. The overseer's hands trembled. The boundary did not protect Whitlow. It did not obey him. It did not even acknowledge him the way it had before. Caleb's voice drifted out, calm as a verdict. "You used the rule. Now the rule uses you." The circle expanded another slow step. The grass beneath Whitlow's boots smoothed, darkened, becoming the same polished earth Elias had seen in the clearing. Whitlow looked down, panic cracking through his rage. His footprint held. He stepped back. The ground remembered him. It would not erase him. A darker slit opened behind him, like a doorway into depth rather than a room. The air pulled. Whitlow screamed, raw and human, no longer master, just prey at the edge of something he could not threaten. Overseers rushed forward and stopped short, trapped by the same boundary they had used as a weapon. Whitlow clawed at the grass, trying to drag himself away. The humming deepened into a final decision, and then Whitlow was gone, not dragged by hands, not torn apart, simply removed, as if the plantation's lie had been plucked from its own ground. The slit sealed like a mouth closing. Silence flooded the yard so suddenly Elias felt dizzy. The lantern flame flickered once, then went out. Not stolen, not sucked down. Extinguished, as if the night had finished speaking. No one moved. Overseers stood with blank faces, their power drained by the sight of something refusing them. One dropped his rifle. Another muttered a prayer he didn't believe until now. Martha trembled against Elias. "He's gone," she breathed. Elias helped her stand. From the quarters, a cabin door creaked open, then another. People stepped out slowly, drawn by the absence where Whitlow had been. They didn't run. They didn't cheer. They only looked, at the porch, at the yard, at the overseers suddenly small. Henry appeared at the edge of the crowd, eyes fixed on Elias. The unnamed man stood beside him, still and watchful, listening for echoes. He met Elias's gaze and gave a single solemn nod. A stooped old man whispered into the silence, voice shaking. "What now?" Elias looked across tired faces trained to swallow words. Then he spoke, not loud, not grand, just clear enough to be heard. "Now," Elias said, "we stop holding our breath." The words hung in the air. No one cheered, no one celebrated. They simply breathed. And for the first time since Elias arrived on Whitlow Plantation, the silence that followed did not feel like fear. It felt like a beginning.